Under the heavy mahogany table, my 14-year-old son tapped my wrist twice. It was our old survival code for Mom, something is very wrong. I looked up at my father's new fiancée, his 28-year-old coworker. She smiled sweetly, pouring expensive wine, but my son's eyes were terrified. What he knew about her would soon blow this wealthy family apart, and I was about to be the one holding the match. My name is Natalie, 34 years old, and a forensic accountant in Chicago. I thought the hardest thing I ever did was pack up my son Leo to escape a toxic marriage. I was wrong. The real nightmare was sitting right across from me at our mandatory Sunday dinner. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your peace from a narcissistic family member. You will want to hear how I dismantled their empire. The evening started like any other at my father Richard's sprawling Tudor-style mansion. The crystal chandeliers cast a harsh light on the tension that always filled the room. My younger sister Penelope and her husband Jamal were sipping champagne and laughing loudly at my father's arrogant jokes. I was quietly slicing my steak, keeping my head down, waiting for the clock to strike 8, so Leo and I could politely leave and go back to our rented condo. Then the heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open. My father, a 62-year-old man who demanded absolute obedience from everyone, walked in. He was tightly holding the hand of Sienna, a woman he hired just 3 months prior as a junior consultant at his firm. I expected him to introduce her casually. Instead, he stood at the head of the table, puffed out his chest, and dropped a bomb that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. "Sienna is moving in," my father announced, "and we are officially engaged." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I stared at Sienna. She was 4 years younger than my sister, wearing a tailored silk dress. Penelope leaped from her chair, squealing with exaggerated delight. She rushed over to throw her arms around Sienna, welcoming her to the family like long-lost best friends. Jamal clapped my father on the back, loudly congratulating him. I did not stand up. I did not clap. I slowly lowered my fork and looked at my future stepmother. Sienna caught my gaze. She detached herself from Penelope's embrace, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor, and glided over to my chair. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder, her glossed lips pulling back into a predatory smile. "I am so incredibly excited to finally be a real family, Natalie," she purred. Her voice was pure sugar, but her eyes were cold. "I know you have been lonely since your little divorce, so it will be nice for you to have a strong maternal figure around." I forced my face to remain neutral. I shrugged her hand off my shoulder and picked up my wineglass. "Congratulations," I said, my voice completely flat. My lack of enthusiasm instantly infuriated my father. He slammed his Scotch glass down, amber liquid splashing over the rim. "Look at her," Richard sneered, pointing a thick finger at me. "Not even a shred of genuine happiness." "This is exactly why your marriage failed, Natalie. You are bitter. You dragged down everyone around you." I took a deep breath, refusing to give him the reaction he desperately wanted. I was used to being the designated family punching bag. For years, my father weaponized my painful divorce, using it to elevate his golden child, Penelope, and her perfect husband, Jamal. While they were showered with luxury cars paid for by the family trust, I was mocked for choosing a quiet life. "I am not bitter, Dad," I replied levelly. "I am simply surprised. You have only known Sienna for 12 weeks. Sienna immediately pouted, her lower lip trembling as she pressed against my father's side. She buried her face in his expensive jacket. "True love does not care about timelines, right, honey?" she whispered, playing the fragile victim. Richard wrapped a protective arm around her waist and glared at me with absolute disgust. "If you cannot respect my future wife, get out." I was prepared to grab my coat and walk out the door, but then, under the heavy mahogany table, Leo reached over. His small hand found my wrist. He tapped it twice. I froze. I looked down at him, and he subtly nodded toward Sienna's left hand. Then I saw the massive diamond ring. My breath caught in my throat. The center stone was an unmistakable 3-carat emerald cut diamond, flanked by 2 tapered baguettes set in vintage platinum. It was not just any ring. It was my late mother's engagement ring. The very same ring that was explicitly listed in her trust to be given to me on my 35th birthday, which was exactly 3 weeks away. Sienna casually adjusted her napkin, making sure the facets caught the light of the chandelier. She wanted me to notice. Under the table, Leo slid his phone onto his lap, hiding it beneath the heavy linen napkin. A second later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I kept my face entirely impassive, a skill I learned the hard way during my divorce, and slipped my hand into my coat pocket to pull out my screen. It was a text from Leo. It read, "Look at her left hand. That is Grandma's ring. And Mom, there is something else." I saw her white SUV parked at Uncle Jamal's house at 2 in the morning on Tuesday when I got up to study. I read the words twice to make sure I was not hallucinating. Tuesday. Jamal had claimed he was working late on a massive real estate closing that night. My sister Penelope had even complained about it in our family group chat. I slowly lifted my eyes from the screen and looked across the table. Jamal was currently leaning over, pouring a heavy measure of expensive red wine into Sienna's glass, flashing her a bright, charismatic smile. Sienna giggled, brushing her hand lightly against his sleeve. To the untrained eye, it looked like welcoming banter. To a forensic accountant who had just read her son's text, it looked like a massive, glowing red flag. The air in the room suddenly felt thick. The awkwardness of the dinner evaporated, replaced by a sharp, dangerous clarity. I was no longer the outcast daughter being bullied by her father. I was a professional auditor, looking at a crime scene. "That is a beautiful piece of jewelry, Sienna," I said. My voice sliced through the chatter, bringing the table to an absolute standstill. Penelope stopped mid-laugh. My father puffed his chest out, clearly proud of his grand gesture, completely oblivious to the legal landmine he had just stepped on. Sienna held her hand up, admiring the sparkle. "Thank you, Natalie. Richard has such impeccable taste. He told me it has been in the family for years, and he wanted it to belong to someone who would truly appreciate its value." "Someone who appreciates its value," I repeated flatly. I looked directly at my father. "Dad, did you happen to tell your new fiancé about the legal stipulations attached to that specific piece of jewelry?" My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "Do not start with your technicalities, Natalie. I am the patriarch of this family. I decide where the heirlooms go. I gave it to Sienna because she understands family loyalty. Unlike you." "Actually, Dad, you do not decide," I replied, my tone icy and calm. "That ring is part of the irrevocable trust Mom set up before she passed. By law, it transfers to me on my 35th birthday. It is not yours to give away." Sienna gasped, clutching her chest, as if I had just physically struck her. "Richard," she whimpered, turning her wide, tear-filled eyes to my father. "Is this true? Am I wearing stolen property? I would never want to cause a rift between you and your daughter, no matter how troubled she is. She was good. I had to give her that." Within 5 seconds, she had managed to play the victim, paint me as the aggressor, and stroke my father's ego. "You are not taking this ring off my father," bellowed, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "It stays exactly where it is." "Natalie, you are out of your mind if you think I'm going to let a piece of paper dictate how I treat the woman I love. You have plenty of jewelry. You do not need this." Before I could explain the very real, very federal consequences of stealing from an irrevocable trust, Penelope jumped into the fray. "God, Natalie, you are so selfish!" Penelope shrieked, slamming her wineglass down. "You are always obsessed with money and assets. You abandoned the family years ago to go live in your sad little apartment and work your boring corporate job. You left Dad all alone for me to take care of. You have absolutely no right to demand Mom's things." Jamal leaned forward, intertwining his fingers. He always played the role of the voice of reason, using his smooth real estate broker charm to manipulate every situation. Come on, Natalie, Jamal said, shaking his head with a condescending smile. Family is about love, not legal documents. You are a single mom living in a rented condo. You do not even have the lifestyle or the social calendar to wear a 3-carat diamond. Where are you going to wear it? To the grocery store. Let Dad be happy. Let Sienna have her moment. Why do you always have to ruin everything? I looked at Jamal, remembering the text Leo had just sent me. Jamal's crisp suit and expensive watch looked perfect, but his defense of Sienna was too eager, too aggressive. The white SUV parked in his driveway at 2 in the morning suddenly made horrifying sense. He was not protecting his father-in-law's new romance. He was protecting his own interests. I reached into my bag and pulled out my iPad. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a tear. I simply unlocked the screen and opened the county probate records I had downloaded weeks ago for a routine financial review. I turned the screen toward my father and pushed the tablet across the polished wood. The bright glare of the PDF illuminated the space between us. Page 42, subsection C, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. The 3-carat emerald-cut diamond ring, originally purchased in 1982, is a restricted asset of the Irrevocable Trust. It is not personal property that can be casually gifted over a plate of roasted vegetables. It legally transfers to the eldest daughter upon her 35th birthday. That is in exactly 21 days. Richard stared at the glowing screen. He knew I was right. He had always thought he was completely above the law, assuming his wealth insulated him from basic legal boundaries. But seeing the official county stamp on the digital document shattered his delusion. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, a vein throbbing at his temple. "You are digging into my private documents now!" he yelled, his deep voice echoing off the vaulted dining room ceiling. "You are spying on your own family. Probate records are public information, Dad," I replied smoothly, refusing to break eye contact. "Anyone with a basic internet connection and a brain can find them. I am not spying. I am preventing you from committing a federal crime. If Sienna leaves this house with that ring on her finger, it is legally considered grand larceny and a severe breach of your fiduciary duty. You could lose your entire position as the trust manager." Jamal stood up suddenly, his heavy wooden chair scraping loudly against the floor. He leaned over the table, trying to use his height and broad shoulders to intimidate me. "Natalie, you need to stop and listen to yourself," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a menacing pseudo-therapeutic register. "You are sitting here threatening your own father with federal law over a piece of jewelry. This is deeply sick behavior. You need psychological help. Look at Sienna. She is practically in tears because of your jealousy." Right on cue, Sienna let out a dramatic breathy sob, burying her perfectly contoured face in her hands. She slipped the heavy ring off her finger and shoved it roughly across the table. "Fine, take it," she cried out, her shoulders shaking with fake grief. "If it means this much to you to ruin our special night, just take the ring. I do not want anything that brings this much toxic hatred into our beautiful home." Before I could reach for my rightful property, my father snatched the ring off the table and shoved it deep into his suit pocket. "No," Richard barked, glaring at me with pure venom. "She is not taking anything. Natalie, grab your kid and get out of my house right now. You are no longer welcome here." I stood up slowly. I did not flinch or argue. I looked at Leo, who had already quietly slung his backpack over his shoulder. He was brave and observant, just like I had taught him to be. "Let us go, Leo," I said calmly. As we walked together toward the heavy oak doors, Penelope shouted after me, "Do not expect an invitation to the wedding, you miserable psycho!" she shrieked. I did not look back. The heavy doors clicked shut behind us, immediately cutting off the toxic noise of my so-called family. The cold Chicago night air hit my face as we walked out to my sensible sedan. Leo buckled his seatbelt and looked at me from the passenger seat. He pulled out his phone, his fingers already hovering over the screen. "Mom, are we going to let them get away with this?" he asked quietly. I started the engine and gripped the steering wheel. "No, Leo, we are not." I knew this was just the beginning. I had drawn a line in the sand, and my father was not a man who handled defiance well. Sure enough, at 7 in the morning, the very next day, my phone rang. I was standing in my small kitchen pouring my morning coffee before work. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I answered it and put it on speaker. He did not bother saying hello. "I just got off the phone with my corporate lawyers," Richard growled through the speaker. "You have exactly 24 hours to come down to my office, apologize to Sienna in person, and sign a legal waiver releasing your claim to that ring. If you refuse, I am having you completely removed from the family trust fund. Every single penny. You will get absolutely nothing." I took a slow sip of my black coffee. "The trust is irrevocable, Dad," I reminded him. "You cannot just erase me from a legal document because you are throwing a tantrum." "Watch me," he sneered. "I control the family business. I control the accounts. I will bleed the entire trust dry in legal fees before I let you see a dime of it. You are dead to this family, Natalie. Make your choice." He hung up abruptly, leaving dead air echoing in my quiet kitchen. A second later, my phone screen lit up with a rapid barrage of text messages from Penelope. "You ruined everything. Dad is so stressed his blood pressure is through the roof. I hope you are happy living in your pathetic little apartment forever. You are dead to us." I set my phone down on the cool granite counter. They really thought they could break me by threatening my inheritance and cutting me off from their fake affection. They thought I was just a bitter single mother who would eventually cave to their financial pressure. But they foolishly forgot what I did for a living. I was a senior compliance auditor. I spent my days tracking hidden corporate assets, exposing massive financial fraud, and destroying white-collar criminals. If my father and Jamal wanted to play a high-stakes financial game of chess with me, they had just challenged a grandmaster to a blood match. I grabbed my car keys and drove Leo to his private academy. I always paid his tuition on the first of the month using the corporate card attached to my consulting contract with my father's firm. It was the only financial tie I still had to the family business, a contract I earned through my own hard work. I walked into the bursar's office, handed over the card, and waited. The receptionist swiped it once. She frowned and swiped it again. "I am so sorry, Natalie," she said, lowering her voice. "The bank flagged this. It says the primary account holder placed a hard freeze on all transactions." I felt a flash of heat in my chest. My father was not just threatening my inheritance. He was actively trying to disrupt my son's education to force my hand. He wanted me panicked and desperate. I smiled politely at the receptionist, pulled out my personal credit card from my own private bank account, and paid the semester in full. I had spent years building my own safety net exactly for moments like this. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was Jamal. I answered on the first ring. "Having card trouble this morning?" Natalie, Jamal asked. His voice was thick with fake sympathy. "Dad called me. He is really upset. You know you are making this so much harder than it needs to be. You do not have the cash flow to survive without the family umbrella. All you have to do is drive down to the house, apologize to Sienna, and sign the waiver for the ring. If you do that, I will personally talk Dad into unfreezing your accounts. I can even float you a small loan if you are desperate." Jamal loved playing the wealthy savior. As a real estate broker, he built his entire persona around looking successful, driving flashy cars, and pretending he was the moral compass of our family. But I remembered the text Leo sent me at dinner. The white SUV parked at Jamal's house at 2 in the morning. I did not need his fake charity. "I do not need your money, Jamal," I said calmly. "And you should tell my father that weaponizing my son's education is a line he never should have crossed. Have a great day." I hung up before he could respond. I drove straight back to my condo, locked the door, and walked into my home office. I fired up my secure workstation. 3 high-resolution monitors flickered to life. My father thought cutting off my corporate credit card would lock me out of the company. He forgot that as the lead external auditor for his firm for the past 5 years, I had administrative access to every single ledger, offshore account, and vendor payment system his company operated. I bypassed the standard login portal and used my administrative credentials to enter the master financial database. If my father and Jamal wanted to play dirty, I was going to strip their finances down to the studs. I started running predictive algorithms on the company's cash flow over the last 36 months. I was not looking for petty cash. I was looking for the deep systemic rot. It took me less than 2 hours to find the bleeding artery. My father's company was highly profitable, but the net revenue had been mysteriously shrinking. I isolated the outgoing wire transfers and noticed a massive anomaly. Every 2 weeks, substantial payments ranging from $50,000 to $80,000 were being funneled out as consulting fees and property management retainers. The recipient was an entity called Horizon Apex LLC. I pulled the invoices. They were incredibly vague. Site assessment, market analysis. No specific addresses or deliverables were listed. I cross-referenced Horizon Apex LLC with our legitimate vendor list. Nothing matched. The company was a ghost. I opened a new encrypted browser window and accessed the state's corporate registry database. Shell companies are designed to hide their true owners, but whoever set this up was sloppy. They used a registered agent service, but the primary operating address was linked to a commercial P.O. box in downtown Chicago. I ran a skip trace on the P.O. box rental agreement. The name on the lease popped up on my screen in bold black letters. Jamal. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen. Jamal was not just defending my father's new fiancée. He was actively embezzling millions of dollars from his father-in-law's company. He was draining the family wealth right under my father's nose, disguising the theft as legitimate real estate consulting expenses. Suddenly, the loud roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet of my neighborhood. I stood up and walked over to my living room window. Down on the street parked illegally in front of my building was a brand new custom black Porsche Cayenne. The driver's side door opened and my sister Penelope stepped out. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses and carrying a luxury handbag that cost more than my first car. She looked up at my window, a smug, arrogant smile plastered across her face. Jamal was stealing my father blind, and Penelope was wearing the stolen money like a badge of honor. I watched from my second-story window as Penelope leaned against the gleaming hood of the Porsche, typing furiously on her phone. A moment later, my screen lit up with another text from her. "Do you like the view, Natalie? Dad said Jamal earned a bonus for all his hard work. Too bad you will never see a dime of this." I did not reply. I simply closed the blinds, plunging my office back into the cool glow of my monitors. Penelope was so blinded by her own vanity and her desperation to be the golden child that she could not see she was sitting on a ticking time bomb. Jamal was not earning bonuses. He was siphoning millions into a fake LLC, and he was using his own wife to flaunt the stolen cash. But I needed more than just a paper trail to completely destroy them. I needed proof of intent. The door to my office creaked open, and Leo walked in. He had his laptop tucked under his arm. He looked at the closed blinds and then at my monitors, which were still displaying the Horizon Apex financial records. "Are they still trying to mess with us, Mom?" he asked quietly, setting his laptop on the corner of my desk. "They are trying," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But Uncle Jamal is making careless mistakes. He bought a new car with company money." Leo raised an eyebrow. "A new car, like a smart car with cloud-connected cameras." I looked at my 14-year-old son, realizing exactly where his mind was going. Yes, a brand new Porsche Cayenne. Why Leo pulled his laptop open? "Because Uncle Jamal is an idiot when it comes to cybersecurity," Leo said, his fingers already flying across his keyboard. "Last Thanksgiving, he made me set up his home network and his phone backups. He uses the exact same password for everything. It is his college fraternity letters and his birth year. If he registered that new Porsche to his standard email account, the dashcam footage automatically uploads to his cloud drive." My heart started to race. "Are you telling me you can access it?" Leo did not answer immediately. He typed a few commands, his eyes fixed on the screen. A progress bar flashed, and then a directory of video files appeared. I am not just telling you, Mom. I am showing you. He clicked on a file timestamped Tuesday at 2 in the morning, the exact time he had seen Sienna's white SUV parked in Jamal's driveway. The video player opened. It was dark, the interior cabin camera illuminated only by the faint glow of the dashboard and the streetlights outside Jamal's house. But the audio was crystal clear. The heavy thud of the passenger door closing echoed through the speakers. Then a woman's voice, sweet and breathless. Sienna. Did she suspect anything? Sienna asked, her voice dropping to a low whisper. Jamal laughed softly. It was a cruel, arrogant sound. Penelope. Are you kidding me? She was fast asleep. She thinks I'm out here closing a massive commercial real estate deal. She has absolutely no idea. Come here. There was the unmistakable sound of them kissing, the rustle of fabric. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the screen. My father's new fiancé was sleeping with his golden son-in-law, but the betrayal went much deeper than a simple affair. We need to move faster, Sienna whispered, pulling back slightly. The old man is completely obsessed with me. He is ready to sign the papers giving me power of attorney over his personal accounts. But that irrevocable trust is a problem. Natalie knows about the ring. She is a forensic accountant, Jamal. If she starts digging into the trust before her birthday, she will see the money you have been moving to Horizon Apex. Do not panic, Jamal replied smoothly. I have already cut off her corporate card. Richard is threatening to disinherit her. We are going to isolate her so completely that she will not have the resources to fight us. As soon as Richard signs the marriage certificate, we liquidate the trust entirely. We wire the remaining balance to the Horizon Apex offshore account, and we are gone. Penelope and Richard will be left holding the bag, completely bankrupt. The video clicked off as the car engine shut down. Silence filled my office. Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide. Mom, they are trying to steal everything and run away together. I placed my hand on Leo's shoulder, feeling a cold, diamond-hard resolve settle into my chest. Let them try, I said softly. Jamal thinks he is a master manipulator, but he just handed me a loaded gun. I picked up my phone. I did not call my father. He would never believe me, and he did not deserve my protection anymore. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for a former colleague who had recently transferred to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I needed to set a trap. I was going to let Jamal and Sienna think they were winning. I was going to let them initiate that massive wire transfer, and the moment they did, I was going to snap the jaws of a federal trap shut on both of their necks. The very next morning, after discovering the explosive dashcam footage, I woke up to my phone vibrating aggressively against my nightstand. It was barely 6 in the morning. The caller ID flashed my father's name, but this time it was an incoming video call. I sat up in bed, cleared my throat, and accepted the connection. My father was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk in his home office, wearing a tailored suit. Sitting right beside him, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, was Sienna. Richard did not bother with a greeting. He looked directly into the camera, his face twisted in absolute fury. I have my legal team on standby in the other room, Natalie, he snarled. They have the paperwork drafted to completely remove your name from the family trust fund. Every single asset, every property, and every penny of the inheritance your mother left behind. You are going to be legally erased from this family by noon today. I leaned back against my headboard, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. On what grounds, Dad? I asked, my voice calm and steady. On the grounds of severe emotional distress and familial alienation, he snapped. Sienna has barely slept. She is terrified of you. You completely ruined our engagement dinner, and you had the audacity to threaten me with public records. You are a bitter, jealous woman trying to destroy my happiness. But I am giving you one final chance to fix this. Sienna leaned into the frame, her voice dripping with fake fragility. Natalie, I just want us to be a family, she whispered. I forgive you for your outburst. Just come over, apologize, and we can put all this ugliness behind us. My father nodded firmly. You will come to this house today, Richard commanded. You will issue a formal public apology to Sienna in front of the entire family. You will sign a legal waiver surrendering your claim to your mother's ring, and you will give your blessing for our marriage. If you refuse, I will press that button and my lawyers will execute the disinheritance documents. You will get absolutely nothing. I stared at the screen, looking at the man who had spent his entire life bullying me. He honestly believed money was the ultimate leash. He had no idea that I already knew his beautiful new fiancée was sleeping with his son-in-law, or that they were actively plotting to steal every dime he owned. I felt a surge of cold power. I did not need his money because the law was already on my side. Go ahead and press the button, Dad, I said. My voice did not shake. Have your lawyers draft whatever fictional documents make you feel powerful, but I will never apologize to a woman who is playing you for a fool, and I will certainly never sign away what is rightfully mine. Richard turned purple. You ungrateful brat, he yelled. You are making the biggest mistake of your miserable life. No, I replied simply. You are. Have a great morning. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the bed. Less than 30 seconds later, the screen lit up again. This time it was not a call. It was a rapid-fire barrage of text messages from my sister Penelope. She was clearly sitting in the hallway outside my father's office waiting for her cue to attack. The messages flooded in one after another. You are actually insane. Dad is crying because of you. You are dead to this family, Natalie. Do not ever contact us again. I hope you and your brat kid enjoy being poor for the rest of your lives. Jamal and I are taking over the business, and Sienna is taking over the house. You are nothing but a pathetic loser who could not even keep a husband. We never loved you anyway. I read the hateful words, but they did not hurt. They just confirmed exactly who my sister was. Penelope was so desperate to protect her status as the golden child that she was blindly defending the very people who were actively robbing her blind. Jamal was emptying the company accounts to fund his secret life with Sienna, and Penelope was busy sending me angry text messages. I got out of bed, walked into the kitchen, and started brewing my morning coffee. The battle lines were not just drawn anymore. The war had officially started. My family had explicitly told me I was dead to them. They thought they had successfully isolated me, stripping away my financial security and my support system. They expected me to break down, to cry, to beg for their forgiveness. Instead, I walked into my home office and booted up my secure workstation. I opened the encrypted communication channel I had established with my contact at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. My family wanted to completely erase me from the trust. They wanted to play high-stakes legal games. I was going to let them think they had won right up until the moment I burned their entire fraudulent empire to the ground. Let them enjoy their fake victory today because their financial execution was rapidly approaching. I packed Leo into my sensible sedan and drove him to his private high school. I wanted to keep his routine as normal as possible, despite the absolute warfare erupting within my family. The morning air was crisp, and I tried to focus on the road, but my mind was calculating the exact legal maneuvers I needed to execute. When we arrived at the sprawling brick campus, I walked him into the main administrative building. I needed to drop off his permission slips for an upcoming science trip and pay the associated fees. As Leo headed down the hallway to his locker, Mrs. Gable, the school bursar, caught my eye. She looked incredibly uncomfortable. She waved me over to her frosted glass window. Natalie, do you have a moment? She asked, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. I stepped up to the counter expecting a question about the field trip. Instead, she slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a copy of the monthly tuition check I had submitted 2 days ago. Across the front, stamped in bold red ink, were the words, "Insufficient funds." My stomach gave a brief, involuntary lurch. I am sorry, I said, looking at the document. There must be some mistake. That check is drawn directly from my corporate consulting account. Mrs. Gable offered a sympathetic grimace. I called the bank this morning to verify the routing number, she explained softly. The teller informed me that the primary account holder placed a hard freeze on the account late last night. The funds were completely locked and the check bounced. I am so sorry to ask this, but school policy requires the account to be settled by the end of the week or Leo will not be allowed to attend classes. The reality of what my father had done hit me like a physical blow. He had not just threatened to cut me out of my mother's trust fund. He had illegally frozen my actual legitimate salary. I worked as an independent consultant for his firm, and that account held my earned income. By locking it down, he was actively trying to starve me out. He wanted to humiliate me in front of my son's school and force me into a corner where I could not even provide for my child. I did not panic. I reached into my purse, pulled out my personal credit card from an entirely separate bank, and handed it to Mrs. Gable. Please run the full semester balance on this, I said smoothly, not letting a single ounce of stress show on my face. I apologize for the banking error. It will not happen again. She processed the payment, handed me the receipt, and smiled with relief. I walked out of the administrative building, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. The moment I closed the heavy car door and sat in the driver's seat, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. It was Jamal. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and answered the call. I put it on speakerphone. Having a little trouble at the bursar's office this morning, Natalie, Jamal asked. His voice dripped with arrogant amusement. It was sickeningly clear that he and my father had been sitting around waiting for the exact moment the school would flag the bounced check. That was an illegal hold. Jamal, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. You and my father do not have the legal authority to freeze my earned income. That is wage theft. Jamal laughed. It was a cruel, grating sound. Wage theft. Please. You work for a family business, Natalie. The family decided your services were no longer required. Dad called the bank and reported the account for suspicious activity. It will take them weeks to investigate, and by then you will be completely broke. I stared straight ahead at the brick facade of the school. What do you want, Jamal? I want you to learn your place, he sneered. You walked out of that house last night acting like you were untouchable. You thought you could throw legal jargon in Dad's face and win. But you do not have the cash flow to survive a war with us. You are a single mom living in a rented condo. But because I am a generous guy, I convinced Dad to give you one last lifeline. I remained silent, letting him dig his own grave. Come over to the house right now, Jamal commanded. Get down on your knees, apologize to Sienna in front of everyone, and sign the waiver for the ring. If you do that, and if you beg me nicely, I might just float you a small loan to keep your kid in that fancy school. We are your only hope, Natalie. Swallow your pride and come crawl back to us. I listened to his breathing on the other end of the line. He genuinely thought he had me backed into a corner. He had no idea I was sitting on dashcam footage of him kissing his father-in-law's fiancée. He had no idea I already traced his fake LLC and knew he was embezzling millions. I do not need your loans, Jamal, I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. And you should be very careful about freezing bank accounts. You never know when the feds might start looking closely at where the rest of the money is actually going. I hung up before he could say another word. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the campus. They had made this deeply personal by dragging my son into their twisted power play. They wanted me destitute and desperate. Instead, I drove straight back to my home office to finalize my trap. Jamal had just provided me with the perfect piece of evidence to prove malicious financial intent, and the countdown to their absolute ruin had just accelerated. I walked through the front door of my condo, kicked off my heels, and immediately locked the deadbolt. There was no time to cry over my father's betrayal or panic about the bounced tuition check. Emotions were a luxury I could not afford right now. I walked straight into my home office and woke up my high-performance workstation. The room hummed with the sound of cooling fans as 3 large monitors flickered to life, bathing the dark room in a cold blue glow. Jamal thought freezing my consulting account was a brilliant tactical move to starve me out. He was completely wrong. By executing a manual hard freeze on a corporate account, he had to use his administrative login on the family company's banking portal. That action created a digital fingerprint. It gave me the exact IP address timestamp and authorization code he used. He had basically handed me the keys to his back door. I cracked my knuckles and launched my specialized forensic accounting software. As an external auditor, my job was usually to look for accidental discrepancies. Today, I was hunting for deliberate malicious financial slaughter. I ran a targeted script to bypass the front-end user interface and pull raw transactional data directly from the company's master server. Lines of code cascaded down my center monitor. I was not just looking at the fake LLC I had found earlier, I needed to see the entire board. I initiated a deep dive reconciliation protocol, cross-referencing every single outgoing wire transfer over the last 48 months with the corresponding vendor invoices. The software churned through thousands of records. When the progress bar hit 100%, the screen populated with a complex visual map of the company's cash flow. Red warning nodes began lighting up across the screen like a rash. My breath caught in my throat. The bleeding was not just a slow leak. It was a massive, uncontrolled hemorrhage. Jamal had not just been siphoning $50,000 here and there. He had built an elaborate, multi-layered money laundering network. I clicked on the largest cluster of red nodes. He had created at least 6 different shell companies, all registered under varying permutations of the Horizon name in different states. Horizon Logistics, Horizon Property Management, Horizon Global Consulting. I opened a side window and ran the tax identification numbers for each entity. They were all phantoms, no physical offices, no employees, no legitimate digital footprint. Yet my father's company was paying these ghosts millions of dollars for completely fabricated services, site surveys that never happened, legal retainers for non-existent lawsuits, consulting fees for projects that were never initiated. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I traced the destination of the stolen funds. The money would hit the domestic shell accounts, sit there for exactly 72 hours, to clear standard banking holds, and then immediately bounce to an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the ledger of the offshore account. The total stolen assets over the past 2 years amounted to just over $4 million. But that was not the worst part. Jamal was getting greedy, and his greed was making him reckless. I noticed a series of massive withdrawals initiated just within the last 2 weeks, perfectly coinciding with Sienna's arrival and her sudden engagement to my father. They were not just stealing the company profits anymore. They had started liquidating the core assets. I pulled up the corporate property portfolio. Jamal had secretly taken out massive lines of credit against 3 of my father's most valuable commercial real estate holdings. He used his position as the senior broker to forge my father's signature on the loan documents securing millions in liquid cash from private lenders. That was the money they were planning to steal before running away together. They were going to max out the credit lines, dump the cash into the Cayman account, and vanish. My father would not just be broke. He would be tens of millions of dollars in debt, facing massive commercial foreclosure and potential criminal fraud charges for the defaulted loans. Penelope would be left completely destitute, married to a ghost who had stolen her inheritance and her father's empire. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction wash over me. I selected all the files, the forged loan applications, the offshore routing numbers, the phantom invoices, and the IP logs, proving Jamal had authorized every single transaction. I dragged them into a highly encrypted folder. I compiled the data into a comprehensive forensic report. It was flawless. It was the kind of bulletproof, undeniable evidence package that federal prosecutors dream about. I was not just going to stop them from stealing my mother's trust fund. I was going to ensure they spent the next 2 decades in federal prison. I picked up my phone to make the call that would set the trap in motion. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Agent David Reynolds was a senior investigator with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division in Chicago. We had worked together on a massive corporate embezzlement case 2 years ago, and he knew I did not waste his time. I did not bother with small talk. I told him I had a multi-million-dollar wire fraud and money laundering case ready to be gift-wrapped. David immediately stopped typing on his end and asked me for the specifics. I walked him through the entire elaborate structure of the shell company network Jamal had built. I explained how Horizon Apex LLC was just the domestic entry point, a cleverly disguised funnel designed to look like a legitimate vendor. Jamal had layered the theft perfectly over the last 2 years. He used his legitimate position as a senior real estate broker for the family business to generate fake property appraisal invoices and bogus site management fees. My father, who trusted Jamal blindly and viewed him as the golden son-in-law, rubber-stamped every single one of those invoices without ever reading them. The money flowed directly from the family business operating account into the Horizon P.O. box address in downtown Chicago. David asked about the ultimate destination of the stolen funds. I opened the encrypted file I had just created and read off the routing numbers for the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I explained that the LLC was solely owned by Jamal, but he was getting increasingly sloppy and desperate. The recent forged commercial loans were a massive escalation. He was no longer just skimming off the top of the company profits. He was actively destroying the company's core equity to cash out completely before his secret affair with my father's fiancée blew up the entire family dynamic. David whistled through his teeth. He told me that forging commercial loan documents crossed the line from a quiet internal family dispute into a major federal crime. The FBI would need to be involved immediately to handle the wire fraud components. I told him I already had the IP logs proving Jamal authorized every single transfer from his home network. I had the forged signature documents on the commercial loans. I even had the dashcam audio explicitly outlining their intent to liquidate the trust fund and flee the country. I had completely bypassed the discovery phase for the federal agents. David asked what I wanted to do next. He explained that if they moved in right now, they could arrest Jamal, but Sienna might successfully claim ignorance, and my father would likely hire an army of expensive defense attorneys to protect his family's reputation from a public scandal. I could not let that happen. I needed a complete, undeniable public execution of their plans. They had tried to destroy my life and rip away my son's future. I wanted them caught red-handed. I told David about the irrevocable trust my mother left behind. According to the strict legal covenants of that trust, if my father committed a gross breach of fiduciary duty, control of all assets automatically reverted to me upon my 35th birthday. My birthday was exactly 21 days away. I explained my plan to David. I wanted to lay a digital trap directly inside the corporate accounting software. I would manipulate the internal ledger to make it look like a massive sum of liquid cash. Exactly $3 million had just cleared the trust restrictions early. It would sit there glowing like a beacon on Jamal's administrative dashboard. Given his escalating greed, his mounting hidden debts, and his tight timeline to run away with Sienna, he would not be able to resist taking it. He would try to wire that $3 million offshore. David warned me that baiting a federal suspect was incredibly dangerous. If Jamal successfully wired the money offshore before the federal agents could freeze the transaction, the money would be gone forever. But I knew Jamal's methodology. He always used a standard 72-hour domestic clearinghouse to make the transactions look legitimate to the bank auditors. That gave the FBI a massive window to intercept the wire, freeze his accounts, and catch him dead to rights in the middle of a felony transfer. David agreed to the plan and promised to immediately assemble a joint task force. We spent the next hour coordinating the technical details. I granted David read-only access to my encrypted servers so his team could begin building the arrest warrants. I felt a profound sense of calm settling over me as I disconnected the call. My family thought they had stripped me of my power when they froze my consulting account. They thought I was sitting alone in my condo crying over Penelope's hateful text messages and panicking about my son's tuition. They had absolutely no idea that I had just weaponized the entire federal government against them. I stood up from my desk and stretched my arms. The digital snare was perfectly set. Now I just had to wait for Jamal and Sienna to get greedy enough to step into it. And knowing my family, their arrogance would always override their caution. The real game had just begun. I walked out of my home office and headed toward the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. My adrenaline was still pumping from the call with Agent Reynolds, but before I could even reach the refrigerator, a sharp, aggressive knock hammered against my front door. It was loud enough to make the wooden frame rattle. I walked over and checked the peephole. It was Penelope. She was standing in my hallway wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors and tapping her perfectly manicured foot against the floor mat. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Before I could even say a word, Penelope held up a heavy silver key fob bearing the unmistakable crest of a Porsche. "Come downstairs right now, Natalie," she commanded, her voice practically vibrating with arrogant excitement. "I want to show you what actual family loyalty looks like." I did not argue. I followed her out of the building and down the front steps to the street. Parked illegally across two spaces in front of my condo building was a massive, gleaming black Porsche Cayenne. It was easily a $120,000 vehicle. The paint was so pristine it reflected the gray Chicago sky like a mirror. Penelope leaned against the driver's side door, striking a pose as if she were shooting a magazine cover. "Beautiful, is it not?" she asked, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Dad bought it for us this morning. He said Jamal has been working so incredibly hard on the commercial properties that he deserved a massive bonus. Dad told us that since we are the loyal ones, the ones who actually support his happiness and his upcoming marriage to Sienna, we get to reap the rewards of the family business." I stood on the sidewalk looking at the luxury car. Penelope thought she was delivering a crushing blow to my self-esteem. She wanted me to look at the shiny new toy and feel a deep, agonizing regret for defying our father. But as I stared at the vehicle, the financial puzzle pieces snapped perfectly into place in my mind. I knew exactly what the company ledgers looked like. My father's business was hemorrhaging cash. There was absolutely no room in the legitimate operating budget for a $120,000 bonus. Richard did not buy that car. Jamal bought that car. Jamal was using the stolen money from the Horizon Apex shell company to purchase high-end luxury items. By slapping my father's name on the gift, Jamal accomplished two brilliant things at once. First, he fed Penelope's insatiable ego, making her feel like the ultimate golden child. Jamal was a master manipulator. He knew that Penelope measured love entirely through material wealth. By funneling the embezzled cash into luxury cars and designer clothes, he kept her completely distracted. She would never ask to look at the bank statements as long as she had a new toy to show off to her friends. Second, he created a perfect illusion for my father. Richard's narcissism required him to believe that his business acumen was flawless. When Jamal presented him with fabricated profit margins and then celebrated those fake wins with expensive purchases, Richard felt validated. By parading these flashy purchases around and claiming they were the fruits of his hard work, Jamal was making Richard believe the business was thriving. He felt like a titan of industry, completely unaware that his own son-in-law was tying an anchor around his neck and throwing him into the deep end. The business was being hollowed out from the inside, and they were celebrating it. "You are quiet, Natalie," Penelope sneered, misinterpreting my silence as devastation. "Are you finally realizing how badly you messed up? You could have had a piece of this. But instead, you are going to be stuck driving your pathetic little sedan and begging for grocery money." Dad told his lawyers to fast-track the trust removal. "You are going to be completely penniless." I kept my face perfectly still. "It is a very nice car, Penelope," I said softly. "I am sure Jamal is very proud of himself." "He is," Penelope shot back, unlocking the doors with a loud chirp. "And Sienna loves it too. We are all driving up to the lake house this weekend to celebrate the engagement. Just the four of us. The real family. You and your kid can stay here in your cheap apartment and think about your choices." She climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the heavy door shut, and revved the engine. The powerful exhaust echoed down the quiet residential street. She rolled down the tinted window one last time. "Do yourself a favor and do not call Dad," she yelled over the engine noise. "He does not want to hear your voice." Penelope shifted the car into gear and sped off the tires, squealing slightly against the pavement. I watched the taillights disappear around the corner. She was so incredibly smug, riding high on a throne of stolen money. They thought they were driving off to a luxury celebration. I knew they were accelerating straight into a federal indictment. I turned around and walked calmly back into my building to watch the digital trap I had just set. I walked back into the quiet sanctuary of my condo, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. The scent of my morning coffee still lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I found Leo sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, his laptop glowing brightly against his face. He had his noise-canceling headphones resting around his neck. He looked up as I approached, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I saw Aunt Penelope out the window," he said quietly. "That is a completely different car than the one Uncle Jamal was driving last week." I nodded, sitting down on the edge of the sofa and taking a deep breath. "It is a brand new Porsche Cayenne," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "Jamal bought it with stolen company money and slapped your grandfather's name on it to make Penelope feel special. It is a distraction tactic." Leo's eyes widened slightly, but then a sharp, calculating gleam replaced his initial surprise. He turned his attention completely back to his laptop screen. "You know, Mom, those top-tier luxury SUVs come right from the dealership with a fully integrated always-on security package," he murmured, his fingers flying across the keys. "The system includes a high-definition dashcam, internal cabin audio monitoring, and real-time cloud synchronization for theft recovery. The dealership usually sets the entire network up for the owner before they even drive it off the lot." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my mind racing to keep up with my brilliant son. And because Jamal purchased it, the primary account registration would go straight to his personal email. The same email with the terrible security habits you already exploited. Leo smirked, a rare expression of genuine amusement on his usually serious face. "Exactly. It took me less than 5 minutes to bypass his two-factor authentication." Jamal routes his security recovery texts to an old tablet he leaves perpetually connected to his home Wi-Fi. I still have remote administrative access to that router from when I fixed his network last Thanksgiving. I am logged into his master cloud account right now. Leo tapped a final sequence of keys, bringing up a sleek dealership branded dashboard on his screen. The interface displayed the vehicle's current GPS location, the battery life, and a comprehensive library of audio and video recordings synced directly to the cloud. He clicked on a large video file time-stamped from 9 o'clock this morning. It was recorded hours before Penelope drove the car to our apartment to gloat. Jamal and Sienna must have taken the new vehicle for a private test drive before presenting it to the rest of the family as a fake gift from my father. Leo hit play. The audio was incredibly crisp, completely lacking the muffled road noise of Jamal's older vehicle. The interior cabin camera showed the two of them sitting close together in the pristine leather seats. Sienna's voice echoed from the laptop speakers, sounding deeply annoyed. "I cannot believe you are actually letting Penelope drive this," she complained, running her hand along the dashboard. "It is absolutely gorgeous. I should be the one driving it up to the lake house this weekend. I am the one marrying the old man." Jamal chuckled, a low, smooth sound that made my skin physically crawl. "Relax, baby," he replied, steering the car around a corner. "Let the golden child have her shiny new toy. It keeps her completely distracted and entirely compliant. She is so busy showing off her fake wealth to the neighborhood that she is not asking a single question about where the massive amounts of cash are coming from. Besides, we will have our pick of luxury cars the moment we get to the islands." The recording continued with the rhythmic clicking of a turn signal. "Have you initiated the final transfer yet?" Sienna asked, her tone shifting from whining to serious financial business. We need to liquidate that trust account before Richard realizes what is actually happening. His lawyers said they are drafting the paperwork to legally cut Natalie out today, but she is dangerously smart. If she starts poking around the main operating accounts, we are completely exposed. Do not worry about Natalie, Jamal said confidently, a smug smile evident in his voice. I froze her corporate consulting account this morning. She is broke, panicked, and scrambling to pay her kids' tuition. She does not have the resources to fight us anymore. I am going to move the $3 million the second the banking hold clears next week. The video ended as Jamal pulled the car back into his driveway. I sat back on the sofa, staring at the frozen frame of Jamal's arrogant face. He had just confessed to his timeline, his method, and his exact target amount on crystal-clear digital audio. The evidence was absolutely flawless. I told Leo to immediately encrypt the file and securely forward a copy to Agent Reynolds at the IRS. The trap was perfectly set, and Jamal was rushing headfirst into it. But as the progress bar on the file transfer slowly crept across my son's computer screen, I realized the audio file was not over. There were still 10 minutes left on the recording. I asked Leo to let it continue playing. The ambient sound of the car engine hummed through the speakers, followed by the unmistakable sounds of heavy breathing and rustling clothing. My stomach churned as I listened to my father's future wife and my sister's husband engaging in a passionate physical affair right in the front seat of a vehicle purchased with stolen family money. It was not just a casual fling. The way they spoke to each other revealed a deep, calculated partnership. Sienna was not merely a young gold digger who happened to catch my father's eye at the office. As the recording continued, the horrifying truth completely unraveled. Jamal had planted her there. He was the one who recommended her for the junior consultant position 3 months ago. He brought her into the company specifically to seduce my father. She was his accomplice, a professional grifter, playing the role of a sweet, innocent coworker. Sienna caught her breath on the recording and laughed. It was a cold, calculating sound. Do you think the old man will actually sign the power of attorney paperwork on the morning of the wedding? She asked. Jamal responded with absolute confidence. Richard is so blinded by his own ego that he will sign anything you put in front of him, Jamal said. I already drafted the documents. I buried the power of attorney clauses deep inside a standard prenuptial agreement. He thinks he is protecting his assets from you, but the legal phrasing actually grants you full administrative control over his personal accounts the second the marriage is legally binding. And then we take everything? Sienna murmured, her voice filled with greedy anticipation. Every last penny, Jamal confirmed. The moment the ink is dry on that marriage certificate, you authorize the liquidation of his personal portfolios. At the exact same time, I will use my senior broker credentials to drain the remaining equity from the commercial properties. We dump it all into the Horizon Apex shell accounts, and from there, it goes straight to the Cayman Islands. By the time Richard wakes up from his wedding night, his entire financial empire will be reduced to absolute zero. Sienna giggled again, the sound echoing sickeningly in my quiet living room. What about your lovely wife? She asked mockingly. Will Penelope be okay when her rich husband suddenly disappears? Jamal let out a sharp, dismissive snort. Penelope is completely clueless, he said. I have already taken out massive secondary mortgages on the house she thinks we own outright. I used all her personal credit lines to secure the short-term loans for the Horizon accounts. The moment we board our flight, the lenders are going to call in those debts. The banks will foreclose on her house within 30 days. She will be left standing on the street with nothing but her designer handbags and a mountain of federal debt. She and Richard are going to be completely bankrupt. I analyzed the legal structure Jamal mentioned on the recording. Hiding a power of attorney inside a prenuptial agreement was an incredibly deceptive tactic, but it was also highly illegal if proven to be signed under fraudulent pretenses. Jamal was relying on my father's arrogance to keep him from having an independent lawyer review the documents. My father always used the firm's in-house counsel, which Jamal currently controlled. The entire plot was flawlessly insulated from the inside. Sienna had played her part perfectly. She endured the boring Sunday dinners, faked a sweet disposition, and stroked my father's massive ego, all while eagerly plotting his complete financial execution. She was not just a participant, she was the absolute linchpin of the entire operation. The audio recording finally faded into silence as the two of them stepped out of the vehicle. I sat perfectly still on my sofa, the sheer magnitude of their cruelty washing over me. Despite how terribly my father and my sister had treated me, listening to the casual way Jamal and Sienna planned to destroy their lives was staggering. Jamal was a man Penelope loved and trusted. He was planning to leave them both destitute and facing criminal charges. I looked over at Leo. He had taken his headphones off and was staring at the screen, his young face pale. He had just listened to his uncle outline a master plan to completely obliterate our family. Are they really going to leave Grandpa and Aunt Penelope with nothing? Leo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I reached out and pulled my son into a tight hug. They are planning to, I said softly, but they are not going to succeed. Jamal thinks he is the smartest person in the room, but he made a massive mistake when he tried to drag us into his mess. I released Leo and instructed him to lock the cloud door he had opened so Jamal would not notice. I walked back into my home office, my mind operating with absolute cold precision. I had no intention of calling my father to warn him. Richard would never believe me over his new fiancée and his golden son-in-law. He would accuse me of fabricating the digital evidence out of jealousy. I needed the federal authorities to catch them in the act, leaving my family with absolutely no room for denial. I reopened the encrypted channel with Agent David Reynolds at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I attached the audio file Leo had pulled from the Porsche dashcam. I typed a quick message explaining that the suspects had escalated their timeline and confirmed their intent to liquidate the irrevocable trust fund using a fraudulent power of attorney. I hit send and watched the progress bar turn green. David replied almost instantly. He stated this audio was the absolute nail in the coffin. It established premeditation and conspiracy to commit wire fraud at the federal level. The FBI was now fully integrated into the task force. We needed to finalize the mechanics of the trap. Jamal and Sienna were planning to strike on the day of the wedding, but I knew I could force their hand to move much sooner. My 35th birthday was approaching, and according to the strict bylaws of my mother's trust, the moment I turned 35, the entire fund would undergo a mandatory automated third-party audit before the assets transferred to my name. Jamal was an arrogant thief, but he was not completely incompetent. He knew about the audit clause. He knew that if he did not drain the trust before my birthday, the auditors would immediately flag the missing commercial equity and the fraudulent loans. I formulated a plan to bait him. I logged into the master administrative portal for the family business. Because my father had locked my consulting account, Jamal assumed I was completely locked out of the entire network. He failed to understand that an external auditor's credentials operated on an entirely separate security protocol. I navigated to the trust fund's internal ledger. The trust was tied up in long-term bonds and real estate equity, making it difficult to liquidate quickly without raising major alarms. Using my administrative clearance, I initiated a phantom internal transfer. I digitally reallocated $3 million from the restricted commercial property portfolio and moved it into the trust's primary liquid operating account. I did not actually move any real money. I simply manipulated the internal reporting software so that anyone checking the balances on the user end would see $3 million of cold hard cash sitting unprotected and ready for immediate wire transfer. It was the ultimate digital honeypot. I called David back on the secure line to explain exactly what I had done. I told him Jamal checked those account balances obsessively. When Jamal logged in and saw $3 million sitting quietly in the liquid account, his greed and his panic over the impending audit would completely override his logic. He would assume my father had liquidated an asset in preparation for the wedding. Jamal would try to wire that $3 million directly into his offshore Horizon Apex shell company. David confirmed that the FBI Cyber Division had already placed a silent federal wiretap on the family business routing numbers. The moment Jamal initiated the transfer of that $3 million, the federal system would instantly intercept the request. The money would never leave the domestic clearinghouse. Instead, it would trigger an immediate automated freeze on all of Jamal's accounts, and the system would instantly generate the federal arrest warrants for wire fraud. The trap was officially armed. The bait was set perfectly in the middle of the digital floor. I closed my laptop and let out a long, slow breath. My family had spent my entire life making me feel small, treating me like an inconvenience they could bully into submission. Penelope gloated with her stolen luxury car, and my father threatened me with total disinheritance, all while actively elevating criminals who were destroying our family legacy. They thought they were the predators circling me while I was defenseless. But they were just blindly walking straight into a steel cage I had built specifically for them. I looked at the calendar on my wall. My birthday was only a few weeks away, but the real fireworks were going to start long before I blew out any candles. I walked out of the office to make dinner for my son, feeling a profound sense of peace. The federal storm was rapidly approaching, and I was holding the lightning bolt. The weekend arrived, bringing with it the crisp afternoon air of Leo's 15th birthday. After the intense stress of setting the federal trap, I wanted this day to be entirely about my son. I had rented a large, beautiful pavilion at a popular public park in Chicago. I invited a dozen of Leo's friends from his private academy, along with several of their parents, whom I had gotten to know over the years. We were setting up the barbecue, arranging the catered food, and enjoying the quiet normality of a Saturday afternoon. It was supposed to be a safe haven. Then the aggressive roar of a high-performance engine shattered the peaceful atmosphere. I turned away from the picnic table to see Penelope's gleaming black Porsche Cayenne pull into the gravel parking lot. Right behind it was my father's silver luxury sedan. My stomach tightened. I had explicitly not invited them. I had not spoken to any of them since the morning they froze my bank account. But they did not care about boundaries. They marched across the manicured grass like they owned the entire park. My father walked at the front of the pack, his arm wrapped tightly around Sienna's waist. Penelope and Jamal flanked them. They were all dressed in heavily branded expensive weekend wear, looking less like they were attending a teenager's birthday party and more like they were shooting a lifestyle commercial. I wiped my hands on a napkin and stepped forward to intercept them before they could ruin the mood. "You are not invited to this," I said quietly, keeping my voice low so the other parents would not hear. My father completely ignored me. He physically brushed past my shoulder, slapping a fake booming laugh onto his face as he approached a group of fathers standing near the grill. Richard immediately started shaking hands, introducing himself as the proud grandfather and the patriarch of our successful family business. He introduced Sienna as his beautiful bride-to-be. The other parents, unaware of the toxic reality, smiled and congratulated him. Jamal immediately activated his slick real estate broker charm. He started working the crowd, handing out his expensive business cards and offering free property appraisals to the private school parents. He played the role of the generous, wealthy uncle perfectly. Penelope strutted over to the gift table and dropped 3 massive, brightly wrapped boxes right in the center, completely dwarfing the modest gifts Leo's friends had brought. They were putting on a masterful public performance. To the outside world, they looked like an incredibly supportive, loving, and affluent family who had showed up to celebrate my son. But it was a complete weaponization of our family dynamic. Every time they interacted with me, the mask slipped just enough for me to see the venom. They treated me like a diseased outcast at my own son's party. When I walked over to the cooler to get a drink, Penelope deliberately stepped in my way. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "Are you seriously serving these people cheap store-bought hot dogs, Natalie?" She asked, her voice just loud enough for a nearby mother to hear. "If you are that broke because Dad cut you off, you should have just asked Jamal for a handout. It is embarrassing." The other mother looked away, clearly uncomfortable. I did not take the bait. I simply stepped around my sister and grabbed a bottle of water. A few minutes later, Jamal cornered me near the dessert table. He leaned in close, the smell of his expensive cologne overwhelming. "Did you really think you could throw a party and exclude us?" He whispered, his smile never leaving his face as he waved to a parent across the pavilion. "We are the center of this family, Natalie. You are just a bitter, broke divorcee living in our shadow." "Dad is furious you did not come crawl back to apologize to Sienna. We came here to remind you that you have absolutely nothing without us." I looked at Jamal. He was standing there radiating arrogance, completely unaware that the money he used to buy those giant presents was actively being tracked by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He had no idea that the digital trap I set was waiting for him back at his office. "You are right, Jamal," I replied softly, offering him a perfectly blank stare. "I have nothing that belongs to you. Enjoy the party." He sneered and walked away to rejoin my father. I watched them laugh and drink, holding court in the center of the pavilion. They thought this ambush was a massive victory. They thought they were successfully isolating me and asserting their dominance. But as I watched Sienna lean her head against my father's shoulder, while secretly making eye contact with Jamal, I felt no anger. I only felt a cold, calculated patience. They were putting on a beautiful show, but the curtain was about to come crashing down on all of them. The afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park pavilion. Leo was opening his presents with his friends, laughing at a joke one of the boys made. I was standing near the edge of the grass, chatting with a fellow mother about the upcoming school track season, trying to ignore my family holding court near the grills. That is when the high-pitched, blood-curdling scream echoed across the park. Every single person in the pavilion froze. The music playing from the portable speaker seemed to vanish. I spun around to see Sienna standing by the main picnic table, her hands clutching her face in a perfect picture of absolute horror. She was staring down at the empty wooden bench where she had been sitting moments before. "My bag." Sienna shrieked, her voice carrying over the wind. "My bag is gone. Someone took my bag." My father was at her side in an instant, his heavy hands gripping her shoulders. "What do you mean it is gone?" Richard barked, looking around at the startled teenagers and parents. "I left it right here," Sienna cried, her eyes darting frantically around the pavilion. "It is my customized designer bag, and Richard, the watch was inside it. The vintage $50,000 Rolex you gave me as an early wedding present. I took it off because the band was scratching my wrist and I put it right inside the zipper pocket. It is completely gone." A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the party. The other parents exchanged nervous glances. Stealing a hot dog was one thing, but a $50,000 watch and a designer handbag turned a teenager's birthday party into a major crime scene. I started walking toward the table to intervene, but before I could even open my mouth, Sienna raised her perfectly manicured hand and pointed a shaking finger directly across the pavilion. She pointed straight at my 14-year-old son. "He took it!" Sienna yelled, her voice breaking with fake sobs. "I saw him skulking around my chair earlier when I was getting a drink. He was staring at my bag. He is the only one who was hovering around this side of the table." Leo dropped the video game he had just unwrapped. His face drained of all color. He looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "Mom, I did not touch her stuff." He stammered, his voice cracking. "I swear I was over by the gifts the whole time." Penelope did not miss a beat. She lunged forward, her face twisted into an ugly, vicious sneer. "Of course he took it!" Penelope screamed, stepping aggressively toward my son. "What else do you expect when he is being raised by a broke, bitter woman who just got completely cut off from the family money? Natalie probably told him to steal it to pay for his ridiculous private school tuition." I stepped directly in front of Leo, using my body as a physical shield between him and my sister. "Do not take another step toward my son, Penelope," I said. My voice was not loud, but the lethal edge to it made her freeze in her tracks. Jamal immediately stepped up beside his wife, puffing out his chest. "Look at the reality of the situation," Natalie, Jamal said, using his smooth, persuasive tone to address the entire crowd of shocked parents. You bounce a massive tuition check this week because Dad cut off your free ride. You are desperate for cash. Suddenly, a $50,000 watch goes missing at a party you are hosting, and your kid is the one sneaking around the tables. It is not rocket science. The apple does not fall far from the thieving tree. My father slammed his fist against the wooden picnic table. Hand it over right now, boy! Richard bellowed at Leo, his face turning an angry shade of purple. Empty your pockets and bring me your backpack. If you give the watch back right now, I will not call the police and have you arrested on your own birthday. The public humiliation was profound. The other parents were whispering to each other, pulling their own children a few steps back. My family had successfully hijacked a joyful afternoon and turned it into a public execution of my character and my son's innocence. They were branding my child as a criminal in front of his peers, all to punish me for not bowing down to their demands. I looked at Sienna. Her hands were still covering her face, pretending to cry, but I could see the malicious, triumphant smirk playing on her lips behind her fingers. She had completely fabricated this theft. There was no missing watch, and the designer bag was probably locked safely in the trunk of Jamal's new luxury vehicle. It was a calculated ambush designed to break me down in front of my community. I did not yell. I did not frantically defend my son to the whispering crowd. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. If a $50,000 watch has been stolen, Dad, I said, clearly staring him right in the eyes, then we absolutely need to involve the authorities. Let us call the police right now and have them search every single car in this parking lot, including Jamal's new Porsche. Jamal's smug smile instantly vanished. He shifted his weight, his eyes darting nervously toward the parking lot where his gleaming black Porsche Cayenne was parked. He knew that if actual on-duty police officers arrived with a warrant to search the vehicles, his entire fraudulent empire could be exposed prematurely. There was no stolen watch, but there was plenty of financial paperwork and stolen cash hidden in his life. However, Jamal was a professional manipulator, and he never walked into a situation without a backup plan. There is no need to dial for emergency services, Natalie, Jamal said smoothly, quickly recovering his composure. We actually already have law enforcement on the premises. I invited a good buddy of mine to the barbecue today. He raised his hand and waved toward a large, heavily muscled man who had been standing near the edge of the pavilion eating a plate of ribs. The man wiped his hands on a napkin, adjusted his belt, and walked over to our tent circle. He was wearing casual weekend clothes, but a heavy silver police badge was clipped prominently to his belt right next to a concealed carry holster. Is there a problem over here, Jamal? The man asked. His voice was deep and gravelly, designed to intimidate. Officer Briggs? Jamal said, using a respectful tone to establish the man's authority to the crowd. It seems my nephew here might have pocketed a highly valuable piece of jewelry belonging to my father-in-law's future wife. We are trying to handle this internally as a family to save the kid from catching a felony charge, but my sister-in-law is becoming completely hostile and erratic. Officer Briggs crossed his thick arms and glared down at me and Leo. Ma'am, stealing a $50,000 watch is grand larceny, he rumbled, stepping uncomfortably close to my personal space. If I have to call in a black and white patrol unit to process a formal incident report, your son is going to leave his own birthday party in the back of a squad car. Is that what you want for him? I looked at the heavy silver badge on his belt. I knew he was off duty out of his primary jurisdiction and acting entirely as Jamal's personal hired muscle. If a felony has actually been committed, Officer Briggs, I said evenly, refusing to step back. Then standard police protocol requires a formal investigation, a warrant, and a thorough search of all individuals and vehicles present. You cannot selectively arrest a 14-year-old boy based on the unverified, dramatic accusation of a woman who claims she simply lost her handbag. Penelope stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with pure malice. She recognized that the theft accusation was losing ground against my logic, so she immediately pivoted to a far more vicious attack. She is delusional, Officer, Penelope said loudly, making sure the remaining party guests and parents could hear every single word. My sister has been incredibly mentally unstable lately. Our father had to completely cut off her finances because of her erratic, dangerous behavior, and now she is spiraling out of control. She is completely unfit to parent this boy. She is probably the one who told him to steal the watch so she could pawn it to pay her rent. Jamal nodded sympathetically, playing the role of the deeply concerned uncle. It is a tragic situation, Briggs. Jamal sighed. If Natalie insists on dragging this out and making a public scene instead of just returning the stolen property, we might need to look beyond the theft. We might need to contact Child Protective Services. A broke, mentally unstable mother pushing her kid to commit major felonies, CPS, would absolutely remove the boy from her custody tonight. They would place him in the system for his own safety. My father chimed in, perfectly completing the circle of abuse. I would hate to see my grandson put into a foster home, Richard said, shaking his head with fake sorrow. But Natalie, if you cannot control your own psychological issues or your child, I will personally support the state intervening. We have to do what is best for the boy. They were actively threatening to steal my child. The sheer depravity of using Child Protective Services as a weapon to force my submission was staggering. They wanted me to drop to my knees, beg for their mercy in front of my friends, and hand over complete control of my life just to keep my son out of foster care. They thought the threat of losing my child would absolutely break me. I felt Leo's hand trembling against my arm. I squeezed his shoulder firmly, letting him know I was an immovable titanium wall between him and these monsters. I did not cry. I did not scream defensively. I looked Officer Briggs directly in the eye. "What is your badge number?" I asked, my voice slicing through the heavy air like a razor. Briggs blinked clearly, not expecting a calm procedural question from a supposedly hysterical, unfit mother. "Excuse me," he muttered, dropping his arms to his sides. "Your badge number, Officer Briggs," I repeated clearly, taking a step toward him. "And the name of your precinct commander. Because if you are going to threaten a minor with grand larceny without a single shred of physical evidence, and if you are going to facilitate a malicious Child Protective Services threat as a favor to your golfing buddy, I want to make sure the Internal Affairs Bureau has your exact details when I file a formal complaint tomorrow morning." Briggs shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting quickly to Jamal. The big, intimidating cop suddenly realized he had stepped into a massive legal liability. Jamal's jaw tightened. The intimidation tactic was failing, and the crowd of parents was watching their entire corrupt performance fall apart. The big cop backed away, raising his thick hands in a gesture of sudden surrender. "This is a civil family matter," Briggs muttered, his tough guy persona instantly evaporating under the threat of an internal affairs investigation. He turned on his heel and walked quickly toward the parking lot, leaving Jamal standing there without his hired muscle. Jamal clenched his jaw, his eyes darting quickly to the remaining party guests. He knew he was losing control of the narrative. The intimidation tactic had completely failed. So like a true predator, he seamlessly pivoted to the one tactic narcissists always fall back on when cornered. He deployed the extended family to execute a coordinated gaslighting campaign. My father's older sister, Aunt Carol, stepped out from the whispering crowd. She had always worshipped my father's wealth and happily acted as his loudest echo chamber. She walked toward me with a look of exaggerated theatrical pity, placing a hand over her heart and shaking her head as if she were witnessing a profound tragedy. "Natalie, sweetheart, please listen to yourself." Aunt Carol cooed, her voice dripping with sickening condescension. "You are completely paranoid. You are screaming at off-duty police officers and accusing your own loving family of these wild, impossible conspiracies. Ever since your divorce, your mental health has just completely deteriorated. We are all so deeply worried about you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the extended family members who had tagged along with my father. My cousin Greg crossed his arms and sighed loudly for the benefit of the other parents. "She is losing it," Greg whispered, making sure his voice carried across the picnic tables. "She has been like this for months, completely erratic and hostile. Richard has been paying for everything just to keep her afloat, and this is how she repays him." The gaslighting was a full-scale coordinated assault. They were literally forming a circle around me, building an alternate reality right in front of my son's friends and their parents. They wanted the entire community to view me as a hysterical, broken woman who was projecting her own failures onto her generous, supportive family. Penelope jumped right in to reinforce Aunt Carol's toxic narrative. "You need severe psychiatric help, Natalie," Penelope said, her voice laced with fake, trembling concern. "You are traumatizing Leo. You are teaching him to steal from us. And now you are acting like a crazy person in the middle of a public park. Dad is right. If you do not check yourself into a facility and get the psychological evaluation you clearly need, we will have no choice but to call the state to protect my nephew." I looked around the tight circle of faces. My father was standing tall and righteous, playing the exhausted patriarch. Sienna was burying her face in his shoulder, pretending to cry over a watch that never existed. Jamal was wearing a mask of grave therapeutic concern. Aunt Carol and Greg were shaking their heads in perfect unison. They expected me to crack. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to frantically try and defend my sanity to the crowd of onlookers. They knew that if I raised my voice or showed any strong emotion, it would only serve as further absolute proof that I was unhinged. But I was not the scared, isolated woman they thought I was. I was a senior forensic accountant who spent my life analyzing data, identifying patterns, and exposing massive lies. I looked at them not as a family, but as a collection of failing financial liabilities. Their words did not hurt me because I already held the absolute proof of their devastating crimes. I knew about the Horizon Apex Shell Company. I knew about the forged commercial loans Jamal had executed. I knew about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I let their insults wash over me like water off glass. I maintained a stone-cold expression, letting the heavy silence stretch out until their smug smiles began to falter. The longer I stood there, completely unaffected, the more foolish and desperate their theatrical performance appeared to the crowd. "Are you quite finished?" I asked. My voice was calm, steady, and entirely devoid of emotion. My father scowled, his frustration boiling over because I refused to play my assigned role of the hysterical victim. "This is not a joke," Natalie, Richard barked, dropping the concerned father act entirely. "You have until Monday to return Sienna's watch and seek professional help. If you do not, my lawyers will contact Child Protective Services, and I will personally see to it that Leo is removed from your toxic environment." I did not bother to answer him. I looked down at Leo. My brave 14-year-old son was standing tall, his jaw set tightly, refusing to show them a single ounce of fear. I reached out and took his hand. I squeezed it gently, and then I tapped my index finger against his wrist twice. It was our old survival code, but the meaning had completely changed. It no longer meant that something was very wrong. It meant that I had the entire situation completely under control. Leo looked up at me and gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. He understood. I turned my back on my father, my sister, and the entire toxic circle of my extended family. I did not hurl an insult or make a dramatic exit speech. I simply walked away. Leo matched my pace perfectly. We walked across the grass past the whispering parents and the silent teenagers, holding our heads high with absolute dignity. They thought they had won the battle today by humiliating me. They had no idea I was about to win the entire war. Let them enjoy their fake $50,000 theft. On Monday, they were going to lose absolutely everything. The drive back to our condo was quiet. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the Chicago skyline. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Leo was looking out the window, his expression thoughtful and calm. He had faced down a corrupt police officer and an entire family of abusers without shedding a single tear or breaking under their pressure. I had never been more proud of him. When we finally walked through our front door, I locked the deadbolt and turned to my son. I promised him that what happened today would never happen again. They had fired their last shot. Now it was my turn to pull the trigger. I walked directly into my home office and woke up my monitors. The confrontation at the park was not just a dramatic family fight, it was a massive psychological catalyst. Jamal and Sienna had tried to break me publicly and failed completely. I knew exactly how narcissists operated when they felt their control slipping. They would panic. They would seek immediate validation and power, and for Jamal, power was entirely tied to stolen money. He would retreat to his home office, log into the family business servers, and try to find a way to punish me financially. He was going to be looking at the accounts tonight. It was the absolute perfect moment to execute the final phase of my masterstroke. Earlier in the week, I had prepped the digital environment by staging a phantom $3 million within the trust ledger. But I had kept it shielded behind a dual authentication firewall so Jamal could not fully access it yet. I wanted the anticipation to build, but tonight I was dropping the shield. I opened my administrative console and entered my overriding forensic credentials. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I isolated the restricted commercial property portfolio within the trust. With a few deliberate keystrokes, I executed the command to unmask the staged funds. I systematically removed the red tape, the waiting periods, and the signature requirements that usually locked down such a massive amount of equity. I manipulated the front-end user interface so that any standard executive login would see a glaring, unmistakable update. The system now displayed $3 million of cold hard cash, sitting completely unprotected in the primary liquid operating account. It looked as though my father had panicked after the park incident and initiated an emergency liquidation, perhaps, to secure the cash for his new marriage before I could legally contest it. It was the ultimate bait, and it was glowing like a neon sign on the digital dashboard. I leaned back in my chair and pulled up the active user log for the company network. I knew Jamal's habits. I knew his escalating greed. He was drowning in hidden debt from the secondary mortgages he took out on Penelope's house, and his offshore lenders in the Cayman Islands were likely demanding their payments. He was under immense pressure to finalize his escape plan with Sienna. Seeing $3 million suddenly become liquid and unprotected right before my 35th birthday would be too much for him to resist. He would not stop to question why the money was suddenly available. His arrogance would convince him that he was just incredibly lucky that my father had inadvertently handed him the keys to the kingdom. He would assume he could quickly wire the money to his Horizon Apex shell company, scrub the transaction history, and board a flight with Sienna before anyone even noticed the cash was missing. I opened my encrypted communication channel with Agent David Reynolds at the IRS. I typed a brief message confirming that the final firewall had been dropped. "The bait is live," I wrote. "The money is visible on the primary dashboard. The federal wiretap is primed and waiting." David replied within seconds. "We are monitoring the domestic clearinghouse routers. The task force is on standby. The moment he initiates the transfer, we lock the doors." I kept my eyes glued to the active user log on my center monitor. The digital clock in the corner of my screen ticked forward. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. The condo was completely silent except for the soft hum of my computer fans. I was a predator sitting perfectly still in the tall grass, watching the trap I had meticulously built. Suddenly at 8:45, a new line of code populated on the screen. An executive user had just logged into the remote server. I checked the IP address. It belonged to the router in Jamal's home office. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. He was in. Jamal was looking right at the $3 million. The bait was in the water and the shark was circling. All he had to do now was take a bite and his entire life would end. I watched the cursor blink on my screen as Jamal maintained his remote connection to the server. He stayed logged in for exactly 12 minutes. I could almost picture him sitting in his lavishly decorated home office, staring at the screen in absolute disbelief. The $3 million was just sitting there, completely unrestricted. He logged out abruptly. I knew he was immediately calling Sienna to tell her the incredible news. For the next 4 days, Jamal obsessively checked the account. My administrative log showed his IP address pinging the server every single morning, afternoon, and late into the night. He was watching the money, terrified that my father, or the trust managers would suddenly move it back behind the corporate firewall. He was working up the nerve to steal it. By Friday afternoon, the tension in my condo was palpable. My 35th birthday was on Monday. That meant the automatic trust audit would officially trigger at the start of the next business week. Jamal was entirely out of time. If he did not move the money today before the strict 4 o'clock banking cutoff, the auditors would lock down the entire system on Monday morning, and he would never get another chance. At 2 o'clock on Friday, Leo walked into my office and handed me his tablet. He had pulled one final audio intercept from Jamal's car earlier that morning. I pressed play. The panic in their voices was incredibly satisfying. Sienna sounded absolutely frantic. "You have to transfer it today, Jamal," she practically screamed over the engine noise. "Richard told me this morning that his lawyers are finalizing the new trust documents on Monday. If Natalie somehow forces an audit before we secure the cash, we are going to federal prison. We cannot wait for the wedding anymore. Take the $3 million, drain the credit lines, and we leave tonight." "I am doing it," Jamal snapped back, his smooth, arrogant demeanor completely shattered by fear. "I will initiate the wire transfer at exactly 3:55 this afternoon. The corporate accounts department goes home at 3:30 on Fridays. Nobody will be at the office to see the withdrawal alert. The money will sit in the domestic clearinghouse over the weekend, and it will automatically dump into the Horizon Apex offshore account by Monday morning. We will be sitting on a beach before Richard even realizes his accounts are empty." I handed the tablet back to Leo and smiled. Jamal thought he was a criminal mastermind, utilizing the Friday afternoon banking blind spot. He did not realize that federal investigators do not clock out at 3:30. I kept my eyes glued to my primary monitor. At exactly 3:45, the secure server registered a new login from Jamal's IP address. This time, he did not just look at the dashboard. He navigated straight to the outgoing wire transfer portal. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the data packets populate on my screen in real time. He was typing in the destination routing numbers. He was entering the exact alphanumeric sequence for the Horizon Apex Shell Company. I saw the requested transfer amount flash across the ledger. $3 million. He bypassed the standard dual authorization protocol by using his senior executive override, a security flaw I had deliberately left open for him. At 3:55, the system registered his final keystroke. He hit submit. A massive red alert pinged across my secure monitor. The internal system recognized the $3 million withdrawal. The money digitally vanished from the family business operating account. I did not hesitate for a single second. I opened the direct encrypted channel to Agent David Reynolds and typed 2 words. He bit. David responded instantly. The federal wiretap had successfully intercepted the transaction the moment it hit the domestic clearinghouse router. The $3 million never even made it to the bank. It was instantly frozen, suspended in a digital federal vault. "We have it," David wrote. "The money is locked. The wire fraud is officially confirmed and documented. We are generating the arrest warrants right now. We will execute them on Monday morning when the entire family is gathered." I read the message again to make sure I was not dreaming. The flawless execution of the trap felt surreal. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, shuddering breath. The heavy, suffocating weight that had been pressing down on my chest for years suddenly lifted. Jamal had just committed a massive federal felony, and he had done it using his own home network, his own passwords, and his own executive credentials. There was no spinning this to make me look crazy. There was no gaslighting his way out of the undeniable digital footprint he had just left behind. He and Sienna were probably popping expensive champagne right now, packing their designer luggage, and thinking they had just successfully robbed my father blind. They thought they were brilliant. They thought they had outsmarted everyone. But the reality was that they had just locked themselves inside a federal prison cell. All that was left was to let them walk confidently into the final meeting on Monday morning, completely unaware that their entire world was about to be burned to ashes. Monday morning arrived with a brilliant, cloudless sky over Chicago. It was my 35th birthday. I did not wake up to breakfast in bed or a chorus of family members singing to me. I woke up to a brief, highly encrypted text message from Agent David Reynolds confirming that the federal task force was in position downstairs. I put on my sharpest, darkest tailored suit, tied my hair back into a severe knot, and drove downtown. The offices of my father's corporate legal team occupied the entire 40th floor of a towering glass skyscraper in the financial district. It was an environment designed specifically to intimidate. The floors were imported Italian marble, the walls were paneled in rich mahogany, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding, dizzying view of the city below. It was the perfect stage for men like my father to flex their power and crush anyone who defied them. As I walked down the long, quiet hallway toward the primary executive conference room, I did not hear the hushed professional tones of lawyers discussing contracts. I heard loud, booming laughter. I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork followed by the clinking of expensive crystal flutes. I paused just outside the heavy glass double doors. They were cracked open slightly, allowing me to observe the scene inside before I made my entrance. It looked less like a solemn legal proceeding and more like a lavish victory gala. My father was standing at the head of the massive polished granite table. He looked incredibly proud of himself, holding up a glass of vintage champagne. Sienna was glued to his side wearing a pristine white designer dress that practically screamed she was the new matriarch of the family. She was resting her left hand prominently on the edge of the table, making sure my mother's 3-carat diamond ring caught the morning sunlight pouring through the windows. Penelope was sitting in one of the plush leather executive chairs, kicking her feet back playfully. She was already half finished with her drink, laughing loudly at something my father had just said. She looked entirely carefree, completely convinced that her status as the wealthy, beloved golden child was permanently secured by my downfall. And then there was Jamal. He was standing near the window looking out over the city skyline. He was holding a champagne flute, but his other hand was constantly refreshing the screen of his smartphone. He wore a custom-tailored suit and a smirk so arrogant it practically radiated off his face. Jamal thought he was a king. He genuinely believed that the $3 million he wired on Friday afternoon had successfully navigated the weekend clearinghouse and was currently sitting safely in his Cayman Islands shell account. He thought he was just hours away from executing the final phase of his master plan with Sienna. I listened silently as my father raised his glass to make a toast. To family loyalty, Richard announced, his deep voice echoing off the glass walls, and to protecting our hard-earned legacy from those who simply do not appreciate it. Today, we officially cut the dead weight. We secure our financial future, and we move forward without the bitter distractions of the past. Penelope cheered loudly, raising her own glass in solidarity. I cannot wait to see her face when she realizes she is walking out of here with absolutely nothing, she giggled maliciously. She is probably going to cry and beg, "You guys need to let me do the talking." I want to tell her exactly what I think of her pathetic life before she signs the papers. Sienna took a dainty sip of her champagne and sighed happily. "I just feel so relieved, Richard," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder and batting her eyelashes. It has been so stressful dealing with her hostility. Once she signs those relinquishment forms today, we can finally focus entirely on our beautiful wedding and our life together. Jamal finally pocketed his phone, clearly satisfied with whatever fake banking alert he had just read. He walked over and clapped my father on the back. "You are doing the right thing," Dad Jamal said, using his smooth, persuasive real estate broker tone. "Natalie needs this brutal wake-up call. It is tough love. She has to hit rock bottom before she learns to respect everything you have built for us." They were literally toasting to my financial execution. They had gathered in this opulent room to celebrate my destruction, utterly convinced that I was a broken, terrified woman coming to surrender. They thought the heavy leather binders sitting on the conference table filled with legal waivers and disinheritance clauses were the ultimate weapons. I took a slow, deep breath. I smoothed the lapels of my dark suit jacket. I did not feel an ounce of fear, sadness, or intimidation. I only felt the cold, hard steel of absolute justice. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped boldly into the room. The heavy glass doors shut behind me with a soft thud. The celebratory laughter in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, hostile silence. My father placed his champagne flute down on the polished granite table and folded his hands, sitting tall in his high-backed leather chair. Penelope was the first to speak. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh, her eyes scanning the empty hallway behind me as the glass doors settled. "Did you really come alone, Natalie?" She sneered, swirling the last bit of champagne in her crystal glass. "I thought you would at least bring that cheap public defender you probably hired to represent you. Or are you so completely broke that you could not even afford a ride-share for a lawyer?" Sienna leaned forward in her chair, deliberately resting her chin on her left hand so the 3-carat diamond ring caught the bright morning light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maybe she finally realized that no lawyer can save her from her own toxic behavior. Sienna purred, her voice dripping with fake, sickening pity. "It takes a lot of courage to come here today and admit you were wrong, Natalie. I know you are struggling, but I am proud of you for finally surrendering. It is the first step toward you getting the psychological help you desperately need." I ignored both of them and kept my eyes locked on my father. Richard did not smile. His face was a mask of cold, corporate cruelty. He reached out and pushed a thick black leather binder across the smooth surface of the granite table. It slid precisely across the stone and stopped directly in front of the empty chair opposite him. Beside it, he placed a heavy gold fountain pen. "Have a seat, Natalie," Richard commanded, using the exact same tone he used to dismiss entry-level employees who had disappointed him. "There will be no negotiations today. Inside that binder is a comprehensive legal waiver drafted by my top corporate attorneys." He tapped the table with his index finger to emphasize his point. "By signing that document, you formally and permanently relinquish all current and future claims to your mother's trust fund, the family estate, and any corporate holdings. You will also sign a strict non-disclosure agreement forbidding you from ever discussing my business, my finances, or my marriage to Sienna. You will walk out of this building with absolutely nothing, and you will never contact this family again." I remained standing, my hands resting calmly at my sides. I looked down at the thick black binder and then back up at my father. "And if I refuse to sign your paperwork?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. Richard's face hardened, his jaw clenching with barely contained rage. "If you refuse to sign, my security team will physically detain you in this room while I make a phone call to the Chicago Police Department," he stated coldly. "We audited the network logs over the weekend. We know you used your external consultant credentials to access highly classified internal ledgers that you had no authorization to view. That is corporate espionage, Natalie. It is a major federal crime. I have the digital evidence printed out and ready to hand over to the district attorney. You will go to federal prison, and I will personally ensure your son is placed in the state foster system before the sun goes down today. Sign the papers or lose your freedom and your child. Those are your only two options." Jamal stepped away from the window, pulling back the crisp cuff of his custom-tailored suit to check the time. He tapped the glass face of his massive diamond-encrusted luxury watch. It was a disgustingly flashy timepiece, another expensive item he had undoubtedly purchased using the stolen Horizon Apex money. "Let us speed this up, Natalie," Jamal said, his tone laced with arrogant impatience. "We have a very tight schedule today. Dad and Sienna have a luxury wedding tasting to get to, and I have a massive commercial real estate deal closing this afternoon. Stop stalling. Pick up the pen and do exactly what you are told." The sheer irony of their threats was almost too much to process. My father was threatening me with a fabricated charge of corporate espionage simply because I was doing my actual job as an auditor. Meanwhile, the man standing right next to him had actively embezzled millions of dollars, forged commercial loan documents, and committed massive federal wire fraud just 72 hours ago. Jamal thought his offshore wire transfer had cleared the banking holds over the weekend. He thought he was walking out of this meeting a multimillionaire ready to flee the country with my father's new fiancée. He had absolutely no idea that his money was currently frozen in a federal vault. I did not reach for the gold pen. I did not sit down in the chair. I stood perfectly still, looking at the four people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They thought they had backed me into a corner with their expensive lawyers and their empty threats. I just needed to stall them for another 60 seconds. 60 seconds. I looked down at the heavy gold fountain pen resting on the dark leather binder. My father tapped his fingers impatiently against the polished granite table, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet room. "Well," Richard demanded, his voice rising in volume. "Are you going to sign the paperwork, or do I need to call the security desk right now to have you escorted out in handcuffs?" Penelope leaned forward, her eyes wide with eager anticipation. "Come on, Natalie," she taunted, her voice dripping with venom. "Just admit that you lost. Dad has the best lawyers in Chicago. You are completely outmatched here. If you sign it right now, maybe Jamal will be generous enough to hire you as a receptionist at his real estate firm so you can actually afford to feed your kid." Jamal laughed at that, a deep, arrogant sound that filled the executive space. He checked his diamond watch one more time, completely oblivious to the digital guillotine hanging directly over his neck. "I do not know," Penelope Jamal said smoothly, leaning against the glass window. "She does not really have the right attitude for customer service, but she needs to hurry up and sign. I have a massive $3 million closing to authorize this afternoon, and this pathetic family drama is cutting into my valuable time." I slowly reached out and picked up the gold fountain pen. My father let out a heavy sigh of relief, assuming I had finally broken under the immense pressure. Sienna smiled triumphantly, shifting in her leather seat to admire her stolen diamond ring in the sunlight. I held the pen loosely in my fingers, feeling its expensive weight. I looked at the legal waiver that was designed to completely erase my future. Then I looked directly into my father's eyes. "You are right about one thing, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm and steady. "Corporate espionage and wire fraud are major federal crimes, and someone in this exact room is definitely going to federal prison today. But it is not going to be me." I tossed the gold pen casually over my shoulder. It clattered loudly against the marble floor, rolling away into the dark corner of the room. My father's face twisted into a mask of absolute fury. He slammed both of his hands down onto the granite table and stood up, knocking his chair backward. "You insolent brat!" Richard roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "That is it. I gave you every single opportunity to walk away quietly and preserve your dignity. Now I am calling security, and I am pressing maximum corporate charges. You are entirely done." He reached aggressively for the sleek black telephone sitting in the center of the conference table. But before his fingers could even graze the receiver, a loud, authoritative commotion erupted in the outer hallway. The firm's receptionist let out a startled cry of protest. The heavy oak doors of the conference room, the ones designed to keep the wealthy elite insulated from the consequences of the real world, did not just open. They were shoved inward with such forceful momentum that they slammed violently against the mahogany-paneled walls. The celebratory atmosphere in the room shattered instantly. My father froze, his hand still hovering over the telephone keypad. Penelope gasped, spilling her vintage champagne across her expensive designer dress. Jamal spun around from the window, the arrogant smirk wiped completely off his face in a fraction of a second. 3 figures walked confidently into the room. They were not corporate lawyers, and they were certainly not building security. Leading the group was Agent David Reynolds. He was wearing a sharp, no-nonsense gray suit, his Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division badge clipped prominently to his belt. Flanking him on either side were 2 broad-shouldered FBI special agents. They were dressed in dark tactical windbreakers, with the bright yellow letters FBI printed boldly across their chests and backs. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, immediately fanning out to secure the only exit to the conference room. "What is the exact meaning of this?" my father demanded, his voice cracking slightly as his corporate bravado violently collided with actual federal authority. "Who are you people, and how did you get past the front desk?" "This is a private, highly confidential legal proceeding." Agent Reynolds did not even blink. He walked calmly to the center of the room, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of my family before locking dead onto Jamal. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick stack of folded documents bearing the official blue seal of the United States Department of Justice. Richard, Sienna, and Penelope were completely paralyzed. The arrogant taunts, the threats of foster care, the smug laughter, it all evaporated into thin air, replaced by a suffocating icy dread. Sienna slowly lowered her left hand under the table, trying desperately to hide the diamond ring she had flaunted just moments before. Jamal took a stumbling step backward until his shoulders hit the floor-to-ceiling window. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly pale gray. He looked exactly like a man who had just watched his own executioner walk into the room. David Reynolds unfolded the heavy documents and looked directly at my brother-in-law. Jamal, Agent Reynolds said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "You are having a very bad day." Jamal tried to open his mouth, perhaps to deploy his usual smooth real estate broker charm to talk his way out of the room, but no sound came out. Agent Reynolds did not give him a chance to speak. Reynolds stepped forward, his posture rigid and commanding. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering," the agent stated clearly. "We also have a warrant to seize all assets, domestic and offshore, associated with Horizon Apex LLC." I calmly walked around the edge of the polished granite table. While my family stood frozen in a state of absolute terror, I picked up the HDMI cable resting in the center console and plugged it directly into my phone. I tapped my screen once. The massive 80-inch flat-screen television mounted on the conference room wall clicked on, illuminating the dark mahogany panels with a bright blue glow. The federal agents had the legal authority to arrest him, but I wanted my family to see their absolute destruction with their own eyes. First, I pulled up the internal ledger showing the $3 million transfer Jamal had authorized on Friday afternoon at exactly 3:55. I displayed the destination routing number, highlighting the name Horizon Apex LLC in bright yellow. Beside it, I pulled up the forged commercial loan applications, prominently displaying my father's copied signature next to Jamal's electronic authorization stamp. My father stared at the television screen. His eyes darted from the corporate banking details to Jamal, who was now pressed flat against the floor-to-ceiling window. "What is Horizon Apex?" Richard asked, his deep voice trembling for the first time in my entire life. "Jamal, what did you do with my company funds?" "Horizon Apex is a ghost company," Dad, I explained, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Jamal owns it. He has been embezzling millions of dollars for the past 2 years to fund his luxury lifestyle. And last week he forged your signature to take out massive secondary mortgages on your commercial properties. The $3 million he tried to wire on Friday was the last of your liquid equity." Penelope shook her head rapidly, her heavy diamond earrings swinging. "No, you are lying, Natalie," Penelope stammered, gripping the edge of the table. "Jamal would never do that. He is the senior broker. He bought us a brand new Porsche this week. He is making us rich." "He bought that car with your stolen inheritance, Penelope," I said softly. "But the financial theft is not even the worst part. Let me show you what actual family loyalty sounds like." I opened the media player on my phone and pressed play on the dashcam audio file Leo had extracted. The crisp, clear sound of Jamal's luxury car engine hummed through the sophisticated surround sound speakers of the executive conference room. Then Sienna's sweet, breathless voice echoed off the marble walls. "Did she suspect anything?" Sienna asked on the recording. Jamal's deep, arrogant laugh followed immediately, filling the quiet room. Penelope. Are you kidding me? She was fast asleep. She thinks I am out here closing a massive commercial real estate deal. She has absolutely no idea. Penelope's mouth dropped open. She looked slowly from the television screen to Jamal and then to Sienna, who was suddenly trembling violently in her chair. The recording continued, delivering the final lethal blow to my father's ego. "We need to move faster," Sienna whispered through the speakers. "The old man is completely obsessed with me. He is ready to sign the papers giving me power of attorney over his personal accounts." "I already drafted the documents," Jamal's recorded voice replied smoothly. "I buried the power of attorney clauses deep inside a standard prenuptial agreement. The moment the ink is dry on that marriage certificate, you authorize the liquidation of his personal portfolios. We dump it all into the Horizon Apex accounts, and we are gone. Penelope and Richard will be left holding the bag, completely bankrupt." I tapped my screen, and the audio clicked off. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Then Penelope snapped. A guttural, agonizing scream ripped from her throat. The golden child who had spent her entire life mocking me and parading her fake wealth completely shattered. She lunged across the granite table. She did not go after Jamal. She went straight for Sienna. Penelope grabbed a handful of Sienna's perfectly styled blonde hair and yanked her violently downward. Sienna shrieked in terror, her hands flailing as Penelope hit her, screaming obscenities and sobbing hysterically. The two FBI special agents immediately rushed forward, grabbing Penelope by the arms and dragging her off the terrified woman. I turned to look at my father. The proud, arrogant patriarch who had just threatened to throw me in federal prison was entirely broken. His face was a sickly pale white. He raised a trembling hand to his chest, gripping the fabric of his expensive suit directly over his heart. He staggered backward, his knees giving out completely. He collapsed heavily into his leather chair, gasping for air, as the sheer magnitude of the betrayal triggered a severe panic attack. He had handed his entire empire to two people who viewed him as nothing but a foolish, wealthy mark. Jamal was backed against the window, his hands raised in surrender as Agent Reynolds pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The celebratory victory gala had officially become a federal crime scene. Agent Reynolds snapped the heavy steel cuffs around Jamal's wrists, the metallic click echoing sharply in the silent room. Jamal did not fight back. He stared blankly at the floor, the absolute realization of his ruined life crashing down on him. The second agent stood firmly behind Sienna, ensuring she did not try to run or destroy any evidence on her phone. Penelope remained frozen against the granite table, her chest heaving as she stared at her husband in handcuffs. My father, still slumped in his leather executive chair, looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. He had dictated my life for 34 years. Today it was my turn to speak. "You thought you could just press a button and erase me from the family legacy, Dad," I said, walking slowly toward the head of the table. "You brought me here today to force me to sign away my birthright under the threat of fabricated criminal charges. But you forgot that I am a senior forensic accountant. I do not just look at numbers. I read the legal covenants attached to them." I reached over and picked up the thick black leather binder he had pushed toward me earlier. I dropped it unceremoniously into the nearest brass trash can. "Let us talk about Mom's irrevocable trust." I continued, pacing slowly behind my father's chair. "When Mom set up that fund, she knew exactly who you were, Richard. She knew your massive ego made you vulnerable to manipulation. So she included a very specific ironclad clause regarding gross fiduciary negligence. It states that if the primary executor allows a catastrophic breach of trust assets through willful ignorance or gross incompetence, the executor is immediately stripped of all legal authority. By handing Jamal unrestricted administrative access to the primary operating accounts, you facilitated the theft of millions of dollars. You allowed him to forge your signature on commercial loans. You let him bleed the company dry right under your nose." Richard gripped the armrests of his chair. "You cannot do this," he wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. I am your father. I built this company. I control the board. You do not control anything anymore. I corrected him, my voice ringing with absolute finality. The gross negligence clause triggers automatically upon substantial proof of fiduciary breach, and the Department of Justice just provided that proof with a federal indictment. Because today is my 35th birthday, the trust's secondary clause also activates. 100% of the family's assets, the business, the commercial properties, and the remaining liquid capital bypass you entirely. Everything legally transfers into my name as the sole beneficiary and primary owner. As of 9 o'clock this morning, you are officially unemployed, Richard. You do not own this firm. You do not own the properties. You do not even own the chair you are sitting in. Penelope let out a strangled gasp. But what about my house? She cried out, her voice cracking with pure panic. Dad promised me half of everything. You cannot just take it all, Natalie. We are family. You lost the right to use that word when you threatened to call Child Protective Services on my son, I replied, looking directly at my sister. And as for your house, Penelope, you need to listen to the audio recording again. Jamal took out massive secondary mortgages on your property to fund his fake LLC. The bank is going to foreclose on you by the end of the month. You have absolutely nothing left because you married a thief. Jamal lifted his head, his eyes burning with desperate, pathetic anger. You are not getting the $3 million, Natalie Jamal sneered, his voice shaking. The wire transfer went through on Friday. The money is in the Caymans. You cannot touch it. I actually smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had shown in that room. Oh, Jamal, I said softly. You really think you outsmarted the federal government on a Friday afternoon? The money never left Chicago. The moment you hit submit on that wire transfer, you triggered the federal wiretap I set up with Agent Reynolds. The FBI intercepted the $3 million instantly. And because the gross negligence clause transferred ownership of the trust to me this morning, that frozen $3 million is not going back into the company accounts. The federal authorities have already authorized its release directly into my private bank account. You did not steal my money, Jamal. You just consolidated it for me. Sienna finally understood the absolute gravity of the situation. She looked down at the massive 3-carat diamond ring on her left hand, realizing it was no longer a symbol of her impending wealth, but a piece of stolen evidence. The entire illusion of their elite, untouchable lifestyle had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. The second FBI agent did not give Sienna any time to process her ruined reality. He stepped forward, grasped her by the arm, and ordered her to stand up. Sienna burst into tears, instantly attempting to deploy the fragile victim routine that had worked so flawlessly on my father. She